Okay, before we move on to the end and the conclusion of the adventure of the Speckled Band, let's just organize our thoughts, organize our theories, put in everything that we found out so far through our careful reading of the first couple parts, the first 2 and 3 parts of the adventure of the Speckled Band. So here's my clue sheet. I know that we begin the story with Helen, who lost her twin sister, lost her mother, lost her father, and who has shown up at Sherlock Holmes's office. She is frightened for her own life. And Dr. Roylott, who is her stepfather, owns the mansion in which they are. So we find out Dr. Roylott's mean. He's friends with gypsies. He's already killed his butler. So there's some suspicion here of whether Dr. Roylott might be out to get Helen and if Dr. Roylott had killed Julia. There is a motive for Dr. Roylott, and that would be money. So these twin sisters, as they grow up, it's their stepfather who controls the money. But once they get married, then they get their share of their family's money, and Dr. Roylott no longer would have that money. It's suspicious then that Julia, a couple days before her wedding, died, and then Helen is, we find out now, just a couple of days from her wedding, and she starts hearing the same whistles that her sister heard the couple days before her death. So all signs point to Dr. Roylott, right? There's nothing to like about the guy. He's mean, he's angry. He gets in fights all the time. He has a motive. It seems like in this story, anyway, that we already know who the criminal is. It's a matter, and maybe in this case the murderer, it's just a matter of figuring out how he did it. So then we get the story over on this page of how, or the night Julia died, what did Helen hear? What did she see? And she tells the story that at 11 o'clock at night, her and her sister were in her room, which is the room furthest down the hallway of the bedrooms. And they're chatting late at night. They're up because Julia didn't want to go to bed. She was bothered by Dr. Roylott's cigar smoke down the hallway. So they stay up, and they're just chatting about the upcoming wedding. And then Julia asks Helen a strange question. Have you ever heard a whistle in the middle of the night? And Helen's like, no. No. Julia goes, well, do you think you could whistle yourself in your sleep? She's like, no. And she's like, well, never mind. I don't know. It's probably nothing. But then later that night, after we hear the lock in Julia's door, right? We hear a key in the lock. I'm going to move this up. It's a stormy night, too. I'm going to move that up here. A couple hours go by, and in the dead of night, we hear a scream. So Helen comes out of her room down the hallway, and as she does, she then hears that whistle that Julia was talking about earlier, and then a metal clanging sound. She notices that Julia is really shaking as she comes out of her unlocked door, right? So she actually watches the door become unlocked. Her sister Julia comes out and is convulsing and is shaking and is able to say one thing before she dies. She says it was the Speckled Band. We also see Julia point down the hallway right as she's dying, and that's in the direction of Dr. Roylott's room. Again, it's seemingly confirming that Dr. Roylott's a killer. How did he do it when she was alone, locked in her room? There's no marks of violence on her body. The coroner comes, and the coroner goes, I'm pretty suspicious of this guy. He's got a reputation, but we can't pin anything on him. There's no traces of poison. I'm going to put that here, too, under touch. Well, I'll put it under sights. That there is no poison traces. And so now the mystery becomes, if Dr. Roylott killed Julia, how'd he do it? She was locked inside. So in part 2 and 3, Sherlock Holmes actually goes to visit the rooms. And I want to point this out before we go too much further. It does seem like it is Dr. Roylott, because he showed up. He traced his stepdaughter, showed up at Holmes's place and threatens Holmes. Like, you stay out of my business. Rah, 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 rah. So I think probably as a reader, we feel pretty good that it's just now a matter of figuring out how did Roylott do it. So there's a revision of hypothesis. Remember, that's one of the 6 common elements. Holmes thinks that that metal clang that was heard on the night might be the bar on the window falling back into place as the killer flees out the window. It was a rainy, stormy night, so sounds were kind of hard to hear because the wind is whistling and the rain's crashing against the window, we're told. There's also the problem of if it was Roylott who killed her, right? Let's say he went out of his window into Julia's, killed her, then came back out and back into his own room, and then came out in the hallway and was like, what's going on here? There's a big problem with that because he comes out of his room and he's dry, he's in his nightgown, right? Had he snuck through the window somehow, he would have been soaked to the bone. But Sherlock Holmes, in classic Sherlock Holmes fashion, he tests his hypothesis and he tries to slit a knife, just slip a knife through the crack of the shutters to see if he can get a knife in there to lift the iron bar. And he decides he can't. So he immediately revises his hypothesis. There's no way to get through the window to have killed Julia. At this point, we're told that Helen is now sleeping in Julia's room because there's some work being done on the end here. The room was pierced, right? They're doing stonework, and it's open to the yard. What Holmes notices is that there was no real need to do it. Yeah, it's not in great condition, but it wasn't like a pressing need to have to do work on there. And Helen goes, yeah, I think that was just an excuse to get me out of my bedroom and get me to sleep in the room that Julia had died in. We know there's a cheetah. We know there's a baboon. We know there's a band of gypsies on the property. And so when Holmes comes in to inspect, he goes right by this room. He doesn't even bother looking at it. Instead, he goes right into Julia's room and he starts looking around. And here's what he notices. There's a little square of carpet. So he checks the floor to see if there's any secret passages. No. There's a little dressing table. I think it's his bookcase or whatever. There's the fireplace, but there's no going down the chimney because there's staples kind of crisscrossing all the way up, these iron bars in the chimney that would prevent anybody from coming down or going up the chimney. He notices the bed against the wall, and this is where things start get interesting. He notices that next to the bed, there's a bell pull. It's probably hard in 2020 to exactly understand what those were. Maybe you saw it in Cinderella or whatever, or Aristocats. But in the 1800s, if you were rich and you had servants, rather than getting out of bed at night to get yourself a cheeseburger if you're hungry, you would just reach over and you would grab a rope that was hanging from the ceiling. You'd pull on it and it would go up into the ceiling. It would attach to a cable, and that cable would run all the way over to the servants' quarters where it would ring a bell and let your servants know that you need help. Well, Sherlock Holmes notices that there's this bell pull here in this mansion. That's not uncommon. What is uncommon is that it's relatively new. Julia never really asked for it. She never used it. And then we find out it doesn't even really work, right? It doesn't go up to a cable to ring a bell. It just is for decoration. It hangs from a hook that's up in the ceiling. And that's peculiar. I mean, that's pretty sus right there because, what's the point of it? Just to show off that you have money? So you have friends over and you're like, yeah, I got a bell pull. But what's the point? And then kind of near the bell pull, we're told there's a tiny little ventilator. And Holmes thinks this is weird too, because it's not a big ventilator. He says it's just large enough for a mouse, barely large enough for a mouse to crawl through. But he says, if you're going to try to get fresh air, why would you run it into the next room? When with the same effort, you could run it outside and get fresh air. So there's some interesting things going on there. And then we find out at the end of part 3 here that this bed is actually bolted to the floor, that you can't move it. It has to stay right there. Then Holmes goes into Roylott's room and he looks around, and here's what he notices. The table, the bookcase, 2 chairs, one next to the bed, one against the wall here, the same wall that shares with Julia's wall. He notices a safe. And so he asks Helen, what's in the safe? And she's like, papers. And then he says, there's not a cat in the safe, is there? She's like, a cat? Who would put a cat in an iron safe? That's how you would kill the cat. I don't know. He's like, well, I asked because there's this small saucer of milk on top of the safe. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe you put a cat in the safe. She's like, no, we don't have a cat. We have a baboon. We have a cheetah, but we don't have a cat. He goes, well, a cheetah is just a big cat. But, a small saucer of milk isn't going to do much to satisfy a cheetah. So he's starting to formulate a new hypothesis at this point. He also then notices on the bed, he notices a dog lash, a little piece of whipcord, which, they don't have a dog either. They don't have a cat, they don't have a dog. But on top of that, this is a little strange because the end of the whipcord, he says, is tied into a loop. And he's like, well, I don't even know how to explain that. So Holmes then walks back out here and he kind of paces for a while out on the lawn. And suddenly he goes, oh, I think I know. He's got it solved. The problem is the rest of us, including Watson, our narrator, are like, well, tell us. He's like, no, I want to prove it first. So here is the plan going into the end of this story. Him and Watson have rented a room over here in the Crown Inn. And from the Crown Inn, you can see Julia's, Helen's now, window. So tonight, the plan is this. Helen's going to go to bed early. She is going to say, I got a headache, and just go to bed early, and then wait until she hears Roylott go to bed. Then she's going to open this window and put a lamp in it. When the lamp is in it, Holmes and Watson over here at the Crown Inn are going to see that as a signal, and they're going to creep across and climb into her window. Meanwhile, Helen's going to crawl back, sneak back into her own bedroom and spend the night there. That leaves Holmes and Watson in here to solve the mystery in the middle of the night as we come to the conclusion of the adventure of the Speckled Band. So maybe you have your own ideas about how this unfolds. Our 6 common elements. All right, establishment of authority. Yep, Holmes is able to tell Helen where she's from early on in the story. We have limited point of view, right? It seems like at this point Holmes knows the answer. Watson doesn't. That's our limited point of view. You have inept authorities, right? So there were police who have already investigated this case, and they said, well, we can't pin it on Roylott, right? There's no evidence. What else do we have? We don't have the falling action yet because we're not there yet. We did have revision of hypothesis. So Sherlock Holmes had to revise his hypothesis that metal clang was the bar on the window. And I'm missing one. What am I missing? And of course, misleading clues. The problem is at this point in the story, we don't know which of the clues are misleading because we don't know exactly what the answer is. Okay, so see you Monday.